The Galactic Council chamber had witnessed countless historic moments. Wars declared, alliances forged, species uplifted from extinction. But never had it witnessed laughter like this. A towering alien stood at the center dais, its elongated form shimmering under the chamber's gravity-balanced lights. Commander Vraxthal of the Karen Dominion, a species known for its superiority complex and absolute lack of humor, had just finished presenting his report on humanity. "They are inefficient," Vraxthal declared, its voice echoing like metal scraping glass. "Emotionally unstable. Physically average. And most notably, the pause. They lack dignity." Murmurs rippled through the gathered delegates, hundreds of species watching, observing. On the lower platform stood the human representative, Captain Elias Ward, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Vraxthal continued, pacing slowly. "They laugh at inappropriate moments. They form bonds over meaningless acts. They share resources without calculated return." Its narrow eyes flicked toward Elias. "And worst of all, they slip." A few alien delegates tilted their heads. "Slip?" one asked. Vraxthal raised a slender limb, and a hologram flickered to life above the chamber floor. It showed a human walking. "Slip." The human's legs flew out from under him, crashing to the ground in an awkward, chaotic mess. And then the human laughed. Others joined him. The scene became absurd, humans laughing at the fall instead of reacting with shame. The chamber fell silent. Vraxthal laughed. A cold, mocking sound. "This," it said, gesturing to the hologram, "is the species you allowed into the council." Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. Captain Elias didn't react. That seemed to irritate Vraxthal. "Observe closely," the alien sneered. "Even in humiliation, they choose to appear foolish." Elias finally spoke. "We call it resilience." The chamber quieted. Vraxthal turned slowly. "You call it weakness disguised as humor." Elias shrugged slightly. "Maybe. Or maybe we just don't take ourselves as seriously as you do." A few soft clicks of amusement echoed from distant species. Vraxthal's eyes narrowed. "Then perhaps a demonstration is in order." Hours later, the council adjourned into the grand reception hall, an enormous chamber filled with alien cuisines, diplomatic tables, and ceremonial displays. Humans had brought their own addition. A long table of colorful food labeled in multiple languages. Human cultural sharing exhibit. At the center, a bowl. Bright yellow. Smooth. Harmless. Bananas. Elias stood beside it, speaking casually with a group of curious delegates. "It's simple," he explained. "You eat it, peel it, and—" Behind him, Vraxthal approached, surrounded by its retinue. "I will not consume primitive fruit," the alien announced. Elias smirked slightly. "Suit yourself." But Vraxthal wasn't interested in eating. It was interested in proving a point. Stepping forward, it scanned the table, then the surrounding humans. "This is your culture?" it mocked. "Sharing soft food and laughing at accidents?" "Pretty much," Elias said. "Works for us." Vraxthal scoffed. Then turned to leave. And that's when it happened. A single peel, discarded moments earlier by an unaware human delegate, lay just behind the alien. One step, two, slip. Time seemed to slow. The towering, elegant commander of the Karen Dominion lost balance. Its limbs flailed. Its body twisted unnaturally. And then, crash. The impact echoed through the entire chamber. Silence. Absolute silence. Hundreds of alien delegates stared. The great Vraxthal sprawled on the ground. Twisted. Undignified. Broken only by the soft sound of something rolling. The banana peel. It spun gently across the polished floor. And then, a human laughed. Just one. Then another. The entire human section erupted. Not cruel laughter. Not mocking. Just laughter. The kind that said, "Yeah, that happens." Elias covered his mouth, failing, to contain it. "Oh man," he muttered. "You okay?" Vraxthal slowly lifted itself. Its body trembled. Not from injury. From rage. "You dare," it hissed. But the laughter didn't stop. And that's when something broke. Not physically, but politically, culturally, emotionally. To the Karen Dominion, this wasn't an accident. This was humiliation. Public. Irreversible. Vraxthal's voice rose, shaking the chamber. You have insulted the Dominion. Elias blinked. Dude, it's a banana peel. But it was too late. Council security tensed. Delegates whispered. And Vraxthal raised its arm. This act, it declared, will not go unanswered. Elias sighed. You're really going to start a war over this? Vraxthal's eyes burned. You made us fall. Elias shook his head, half smiling. No, he said. You just slipped. The war began with silence. No explosions. No grand speeches. Just a single transmission that echoed across every major system in the galaxy. The Karen Dominion declares formal war on humanity. For a full 3 minutes after the announcement, the Galactic Council did nothing. Chaos. What provoked this? Was there an attack? Did humanity violate a treaty? Dozens of voices overlapped in confusion. At the center of it all stood Captain Elias Ward, staring at the holographic projection like it might suddenly admit this was all a joke. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered. A council aide rushed toward him. Captain, we need an official response. The Dominion is mobilizing fleets. Elias rubbed his face slowly. Of course they are. Across the chamber, recordings of the incident had already begun circulating, illegally at first, then openly. Vraxthal, the fall, the banana peel, the laughter. Someone had added dramatic music. Someone else had slowed it down to make the fall look even more theatrical. Elias exhaled sharply. We are going to war because of a banana peel. On Earth, the reaction was immediate and wildly inconsistent. In military command centers, alarms blared. DEFCON protocols initiated. Outer colonies are requesting guidance. Karen fleets detected near the Orion Gate. But outside those rooms? The internet had already decided what this war was about. Within minutes, hashtags trended globally. Hashtag bananawar. Hashtag slipgate. Hashtag watch your step commander. Billions of people watched the clip. Fin. And again. Children laughed. Adults laughed harder. Someone animated it. Someone made a game out of it. Within an hour, a remix titled Galactic Slip Symphony hit record downloads. Meanwhile, in orbit, the first human fleet mobilized. Admiral Renee Cade stood on the command deck of the flagship Horizon Breaker, watching tactical projections unfold. Karen fleets entering combat formation, her officer reported. They're not posturing. This is real. Renee nodded slowly. Of course it is. She tapped the console, pulling up the now infamous footage. Vraxthal slipping. Crashing. Renee stared at it for a long moment. We're really doing this, she said quietly. The Karen Dominion did not laugh. On their capital world, the High War Assembly gathered in absolute silence. The footage played once. No commentary. No edits. Just the fall. When it ended, the chamber remained still. Finally, one of the elders spoke. This is what they broadcast? Vraxthal stood at the center, unmoving. Yes. And they laugh. Yes. A long pause. Another elder leaned forward, voice low. Do they not understand the weight of dishonor? Vraxthal's eyes narrowed. They understand, it said coldly. They simply do not respect it. That was worse. Much worse. To allow this insult to stand, the elder continued, would fracture the Dominion's authority. Then it will not stand, Vraxthal replied. Orders were given. Fleets deployed. War, in the Karen mind, was not about conquest this time. It was about restoring dignity. The first contact came sooner than expected. At the edge of human-controlled space, near a mining colony orbiting a dying star, Karen warships emerged from hyperspace. Perfect formation. Perfect alignment. Weapons charged. Cold. Precise. Unyielding. On the human side, the response fleet scrambled into position. Ships drifted slightly out of alignment. One rotated too slowly. Another overcorrected. To Karen's sensors it looked sloppy. Primitive coordination, a Karen officer noted. Expected, another replied. Then the human fleet broadcast a signal. Unidentified transmission incoming, the Karen tactical unit reported. Vraxthal, observing remotely, authorized reception. The audio played. First, static. Laughter. Not one voice. Thousands. Played. Echoing. The Karen officers froze. What is this? One demanded. The transmission continued. Clips. Fragments. Human voices overlapping. Hey, watch your step. Careful, banana peel. Oof, there it is. And then, the sound. The exact moment. The slip. The crash. Replayed. Amplified. Over and over. The Karen formation faltered, just slightly. Enough for their sensors to register deviation. This is psychological warfare, an officer said. But it didn't feel like warfare. It felt like us. On the human flagship, Admiral Renee watched the reaction. Are they hesitating? Her second-in-command asked. Renee smirked faintly. They've never been laughed at before, she said. They don't know what to do with it. The Karen fleet attempted to regain formation. Commands were issued. Reinforced. Repeated. But something had changed. Invisible. But real. One Karen pilot replayed the clip privately. Just once. Then again. The image of Vraxthal falling wouldn't leave. And for the first time in Karen recorded history, the pilot made a sound. Uncontrolled. A laugh. He immediately shut off his comms, terrified. But it was too late. The moment had happened. And moments like that, back on Earth, Elias watched the live battle feed. He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slowly. This is the dumbest war in galactic history, he said. A communications officer glanced at him. Sir, it's working. Elias sighed. Yeah, he said quietly. That's the problem. Because this wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about something far more dangerous. The Karen Dominion was built on control. On perfection. On never falling. And humanity? Humanity had just shown the entire galaxy that falling wasn't the end. And that idea was spreading faster than any weapon. The second battle never truly began. It unraveled. Karen fleets had regrouped after the first encounter, restoring their perfect geometric formations, lines so precise they looked carved into space itself. Discipline had returned. Control had been reasserted. Or so they believed. Maintain alignment, the Karen tactical commander ordered. Suppress all unauthorized signal reception. Yes, Commander. Every ship in the formation sealed external feeds. No more human transmissions. No more distractions. No more laughter. For a brief moment, silence returned to the Dominion. Cold. Comforting. Perfect. Then the humans did something worse. They stopped broadcasting. At first, the Karen officers assumed it was a retreat. A sign of weakness. Human vessels have ceased signal output, one reported. Predictable, another replied. They rely on chaos. Without it, they are nothing. But minutes passed. Then hours. Still nothing. No signals. No interference. Just quiet. And that's when the problem began. Because once something gets into your mind, silence doesn't remove it. It amplifies it. On a Karen interceptor ship, Pilot Unit Saraketh adjusted her controls, eyes fixed forward. Formation, perfect. Velocity, stable. Weapons, ready. Everything as it should be. And yet, her thoughts drifted. Just slightly. Just enough. She remembered the footage. The fall. The impossible, undignified motion. The way Vraxthal's limbs had flailed, uncontrolled, chaotic. Unacceptable. She tightened her grip on the controls. Focus, she whispered. And then, a thought she couldn't suppress. What if it happened again? Her eyes flicked to the deck beneath her feet. Smooth. Polished. But the thought lingered. What if I slipped? Her heart rate spiked. Karen didn't have a word for anxiety. But they were learning. Across the fleet, similar cracks appeared. A gunner hesitated before firing. A navigator double-checked coordinates, then checked again. A communications officer muted his own channel after hearing something that wasn't there. A faint echo. Laughter. Not real. Not present. But remembered. And memory, for the Karen, was supposed to be perfect. Stable. Reliable. Now it wasn't. On the human side, Admiral Renee Cade stood with arms crossed, watching the enemy formation. "They're slowing," her officer said. "Not slowing," Renee corrected. Second-guessing. She turned to the comm station. "Ready the next phase." The officer blinked. "Ma'am, we're not broadcasting anything." Renee smiled. "Exactly." Instead of signals, the humans deployed something far more subtle. Tiny drones, barely larger than dust particles, drifted silently through space. Invisible to most sensors. Harmless. Completely unarmed. They slipped between Karen ships, unnoticed. Attaching to hulls. Clinging to antennae. Resting near viewports. And then, they did nothing. For a while. Just waited. Inside the Karen flagship, Vraxthal stood at the command dais, monitoring the fleet. "Report," it demanded. "Formation stable," the tactical unit replied. "Human fleet maintaining distance. No engagement." Vraxthal narrowed its eyes. "They stall. They fear us." "No," Vraxthal said quietly. "They're doing something." Hours later, it began. Not with sound. Not with visuals. But with timing. A Karen officer reached for a control panel. And his hand slipped. Just slightly. Enough to miss the input. He froze. That had never happened before. Never. He tried again. Perfect. But the moment lingered. A seed of doubt. On another ship, a pilot adjusted course. And overcorrected. By 0.02 degrees. Insignificant. But for the Karen? The flaw. A mistake. The drones activated. Not with noise. Not with attack. But with projection. Tiny holograms flickered into existence across the fleet. Barely visible. Blink and you miss it flashes. A foot. A surface. A peel. Slip. Gone. Then again. On another ship. Another corridor. Another screen. A flicker of the same moment. The same fall. The same loss of control. Panic didn't erupt. It seeped. Slow. Silent. Inevitable. Karen soldiers began reacting to things that weren't there. Flinching. Pausing. Checking the ground. Rechecking. Rechecking again. Formation lines wavered. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But enough. Enough for human sensors to track. Enough for human pilots to exploit. "Now," Renee said. Human ships surged forward, not in perfect lines, but in chaotic, unpredictable arcs. To the Karen, it looked wrong. Dangerous. Unstable. And that made it impossible to predict. "Engage," the Karen commander ordered. Weapons fired. Precise. Deadly. But the humans didn't meet force with force. They moved like they always did. Adjusting. Adapting. Recovering from near misses like they expected to fail and planned for it. Because they did. On one Karen ship, pilot Saraketh hesitated again. Just for a fraction of a second. But in battle, that's everything. A human fighter slipped past her defenses, disabling her weapons without destroying the ship. Non-lethal. Intentional. Confusing. "Why?" she whispered. Back on the flagship, Vraxthal watched the unfolding chaos. "This is not warfare," it said. "No," its second replied, voice unsteady. "It's something else." Vraxthal clenched its claws. "They fight without order. Without discipline. Without." It stopped. Because that wasn't true. There was discipline. Just not the kind the Karen understood. Human discipline wasn't about perfection. It was about recovery. About continuing after failure. After falling. On every Karen screen, tiny flickers still appeared. A reminder. A moment. A weakness. Not physical. Mental. Cultural. Existential. And then, for the first time in Dominion history, a Karen squad broke formation. Not from damage. Not from orders. But from uncertainty. Admiral Renee exhaled slowly. They're collapsing, her officer said. Not collapsing, she corrected. They're learning something they were never meant to. Back in the Karen flagship, Vraxthal whispered a single, impossible thought. We are not perfect. And that realization was more devastating than any weapon humanity could have ever created. The war didn't end. It unraveled. Not with explosions. Not with decisive victories. But with something far more dangerous to the Karen Dominion. Instability. At first, High Command denied it. All fleets report minor deviations, an officer stated, voice rigid. Within acceptable parameters. But the numbers told a different story. Reaction times, slower. Formation precision, dropping. Command compliance, delayed. Tiny flaws. Individually meaningless. Collectively catastrophic. Vraxthal stood alone in the central command chamber of the Dominion flagship. No advisors. No witnesses. Just data. Endless streams of it. And one recording. The fall. It played again. And again. And again. Every time, Vraxthal focused on a different detail. The moment of imbalance. The loss of control. The impact. The laughter. That sound. It echoed even now. Unwanted. Unstoppable. Vraxthal deactivated the projection violently. Irrelevant, it hissed. But it wasn't. Because across the Dominion, others had seen it. Others had heard it. And worse. Some had begun to understand it. On a distant Karen cruiser, pilot Saraketh sat alone in her cockpit. Her hands hovered over the controls. Still unmoving. The battle outside had slowed to scattered engagements. Human ships darted in unpredictable patterns, never fully committing, never fully retreating. Like they were waiting. Saraketha's breathing was uneven. Again, something Karen physiology wasn't designed for. She replayed her last maneuver in her mind. The hesitation. The correction. The mistake. Her claws tightened. I did not slip, she whispered. But the thought lingered. You almost did. Her gaze drifted downward. To the floor beneath her. Perfectly stable. Perfectly safe. And yet, she adjusted her stance. Just slightly. Just in case. Across multiple ships, similar behaviors emerged. Officers checking surfaces before walking. Pilots recalibrating systems mid-flight for no reason. Soldiers hesitating before stepping forward. It wasn't fear of the enemy. It was fear of themselves. Of losing control. Of falling. Meanwhile, humanity did something unexpected. They stopped attacking. Completely. Human fleets withdrew to defensive positions, holding distance. Observing. Waiting. Confusing everyone. Why aren't they pressing the advantage? A council observer asked. Admiral Rene Cade answered calmly. Because this isn't about winning anymore. Instead, human broadcasts resumed. But not like before. No mockery. No taunts. No edited clips. Just moments. Simple, quiet recordings. A human soldier slipping in mud, then laughing as another helped him up. A child tripping, then standing again, smiling. A worker dropping tools, then shrugging and trying again. Over and over. Across every channel. One message. Unspoken. Unforced. Falling happens. Getting back up matters more. The effect was immediate. And devastating. On the Karen homeworld, civilians watched the transmissions in silence. A young Karen, barely matured, observed a human child fall and laugh. Why does it not feel shame? The young one asked. The elder beside them hesitated. For the first time in their life. They didn't have an answer. In the military ranks, the impact was worse. Because soldiers were trained to be perfect. To act without hesitation. To never fail. And now, failure was everywhere. Not real failure. But the possibility of it. Constant. Unavoidable. On Saraketha's ship, a crew member dropped a tool. The sound echoed sharply. Every head turned. The crew member froze. Waiting. For punishment. For correction. For discipline. But nothing came. Instead, Saraketh stared at the tool. Then slowly stepped forward. Picked it up. Placed it back in the crew member's hands. Continue, she said. The crew member blinked. Confused. That wasn't protocol. That wasn't normal. Something was changing. Back on the flagship, Vraxthal watched reports stream in. Multiple units reporting hesitation anomalies. Command delays increasing. Psychological stability declining. The words were clinical, cold, but the meaning was clear. The Dominion was breaking. Not from attack, but from thought. From doubt. From the idea that perfection wasn't absolute. Vraxthal clenched its claws tightly. This is their weapon, it realized. Not chaos, not mockery. Understanding. And that was unacceptable. Because if Karen began to understand humanity, they would begin to question everything. Prepare a full assault, Vraxthal ordered. Its voice echoed through the command network. All fleets. All forces. Immediate engagement. If we cannot restore order, the pause. We will erase the source of disorder. The final battle began. Not with hesitation, but with desperation. Karen fleets surged forward, abandoning precision for sheer force. Human fleets responded, but not with equal aggression. They adapted, yielded, redirected, survived. In the middle of the chaos, Saraketh found herself facing a human ship. Weapons locked. Target acquired. Her claw hovered over the firing control. She hesitated. Just for a second. Her foot shifted. Slightly. Unintentionally. Her balance faltered. Not a fall. Not even close. But enough. Enough to trigger the memory. The image. The fear. The possibility. And in that moment, she lowered her weapon. All across the battlefield, others did the same. Back on the flagship, alarms blared. Units disengaging. Formation collapse imminent. Command authority degrading. Vraxthal stared at the displays in disbelief. This is impossible, it whispered. No, its second replied quietly. It's happening. And in that moment, for the first time, Vraxthal understood something humanity had known all along. Control is fragile. Perfection is an illusion. And falling is inevitable. The war hadn't been lost. But something far more important had been. The belief that they could never fall. The final battle never finished. It simply stopped. Across the void, Karen warships drifted, engines still active, weapons still charged, but no longer firing. Human ships held position, equally still. Between them, silence. Not the cold, controlled silence of strategy, but something uncertain, something fragile. On the Karen flagship, alarms continued to pulse. Command authority failing. Units disengaging without authorization. Multiple pilots refusing to fire. Vraxthal stood at the center of it all, motionless. Its claws trembled slightly. Not from fear. From something far more unfamiliar. Conflict. Not external. Internal. Why? Vraxthal demanded. No one answered. Because no one knew how. On a nearby screen, a live feed flickered to life. Not from the battlefield. From Earth. A human child ran across a grassy field. Tripped. Fell. For a brief moment, the child lay still. They laughed. Pushed themselves up. And kept running. Vraxthal stared at the image. Unblinking. They accept it, it whispered. Its second-in-command spoke carefully. They do not define themselves by the fall. Silence. They define themselves by what comes after. That thought spread faster than any command. Across the Dominion fleet, soldiers sat frozen at their stations. Not because they were unable to act, but because they were thinking. For the first time without certainty. Without rigid structure. Without absolute answers. On her interceptor, Saraketh slowly powered down her weapons. The human ship in front of her did the same. They drifted there. Facing each other. No words. No threats. Just existence. Finally, the human pilot raised a hand. A simple gesture. Friendly. Absurd. Unthinkable. Saraketh hesitated. She lifted her own. Back on the flagship, Vraxthal closed its eyes. The recordings played in its mind. The fall. The laughter. The war. The hesitation. The doubt. The change. And beneath all of it, a realization it could no longer suppress. We were never unbreakable, it said quietly. Its second remained silent. Because there was nothing to argue. Moments later, a transmission request came through. From the human flagship. From Admiral Rene Cade. Vraxthal stared at it. For a long time. Open channel. The Galactic Council chamber filled once again. Delegates from across the stars watched in absolute silence. This was it. The end. One way or another. Vraxthal stood at the center dais. But this time, there was no projection. No performance. No arrogance. Just presence. Across from it, Captain Elias Ward stood with his usual calm, slightly amused expression. He glanced at the Karen commander. "You gonna be okay standing there?" he asked casually. A ripple of tension moved through the chamber. Some delegates froze. Others leaned forward, waiting. For a moment, nothing happened. A sound. Chirp. Strange. Vraxthal made a noise. Uncontrolled. Unplanned. Unfamiliar. Laugh. It stopped immediately as if shocked by itself. The entire chamber froze. Elias blinked. "Did you just?" Vraxthal raised a claw. "This is illogical," it said, voice uneven. Elias smiled. "Yeah," he said. "That's kinda our thing." A long silence followed. Not hostile. Not tense. Just new. Vraxthal looked around the chamber. At the countless species watching. At the humans. At the memory of everything that had happened. Then slowly, it spoke. "We slipped." The words echoed. Heavy. Unthinkable. But real. Elias nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "It happens." Another pause. Then Elias added, softer this time. "What matters is what you do after." For the first time in Karen history, Vraxthal didn't have an answer. Not a command. Not a declaration. Not a doctrine. Just the choice. And so, it made one. "The Karen Dominion," Vraxthal said slowly, "will cease all hostilities." A shockwave of whispers spread through the chamber. "We entered this conflict to restore what we believed was lost." It paused. "We now understand it was never there to begin with." Silence. Relief. Across the council. Across the fleets. Across the galaxy. On Earth, billions watched the broadcast. Some cheered. Some laughed. Some just exhaled. Back in the chamber, Elias stepped forward. "No hard feelings?" he asked lightly. Vraxthal hesitated. "We will require time to understand your species." Elias grinned. "Yeah," he said. "Good luck with that." And just like that, the war ended. Not with destruction. Not with victory. But with something far more powerful. Change. Weeks later, on the Karen homeworld, a small group gathered in a training hall. A young Karen stood at the center. Nervous. Uncertain. They took a step. And slipped. Fell apart. The room froze. All eyes turned. Waiting. Watching. Judging. The young one stayed down for a moment. Slowly, they made a sound. Quiet. Unsteady. But real. A laugh. And somewhere, far across the stars, humanity smiled.